Welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell. It's great to have you with us. I've got a very special edition this time because I've got 4 guests with me rather than one. I've got Leah, Samuel, Rian and James. Welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you today,
really
Mark.
good to be here.
Well, today we're talking about the gay conversion bill. This is being debated in Tasmania at the moment. It's also come into law in places such as Victoria, and it's soon to come into law, I think, throughout Australia. Leah, if I could start with you. You used to be a lesbian. You're now married. You've got 2 kids.
Yeah.
You tried to access healthcare professionals who were simply affirming. Was it helpful to have that at that time in your life, or was it actually damaging?
I found it to be a very negative experience, to be honest. I went to a GP to go into the mental health care plan in order to seek help from a psychologist. And he took that affirmative approach. And I just found that it was not helping the support that I was actually after. It actually became quite humiliating for me, and it just put a bit of a roadblock on the path that I was seeking. So I did not find it helpful at all, and I left that place feeling extremely dejected and shattered.
But I take it that just because, like, you're now married, obviously to a man, you've got 2 kids, but that doesn't mean that those desires always go away. Like, Samuel, for you, would you say that that's still something that you wrestle with?
Absolutely, Mark. I don't deny the fact I'm still same-sex attracted, but what I'm noticing is my same-sex attraction has lessened as I've gone through my process of counselling and support. My same-sex attraction is lessening. It's still there and still very much a reality, but it doesn't have the control of my life that it used to. A brief example is I used to struggle very much so with pornography. And there was a time where I'd be watching pornography first thing in the morning and right before I went to bed. If I wasn't looking for a hookup during the day, it was this, and it was 3 or 4 men a week as well. So, and in the gay community, that's not many. But now I can go months without looking at pornography. I can go months without having that desire to be sexual with another man. Actually, it's interesting. One thing I've noticed over my time is the desire to actually be sexually intimate with another man is decreasing. It's my sexual. Do I still find men attractive? Yes. Do I want to be sexual with them? No. And there's not this urge to be sexual with another man. I see now that I don't want to be physical alone. I want a heart-to-heart relationship. That's what I long for more now than to actually just be physical with him.
And reading your own story, and you might want to give our viewers a bit of a history, a recap. What do you think is the connection between same-sex attraction for you and childhood trauma or sexual abuse? Is it legitimate to make that connection?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, I was quite young when I was sexually abused. It wasn't until I started counselling that I actually, the memory started to rise again. Because it was so traumatic, I had blocked it out of my memory. And what abuse does to a person is actually it shatters their boundaries. It shatters their trust. It shatters their ability to relate to people. For me, it shattered my ability to relate to other men and other boys. So I couldn't trust them. Of course, all on a subconscious level, like they became, and I actually distanced myself from them. So I would go, and I felt uncomfortable around them. So I'd spend most of my friends growing up were all girls. I was in primary school, my friends were girls, and later in high school, the people I connected easiest with were also girls. But not just that, is my emotional support group was my mother and my sisters. It wasn't my father and my 2 older brothers. I felt disconnected from them. And so I absolutely could say it's applicable to join the 2 together.
Okay.
And a lot of people, it's not necessarily to say that anyone who's sexually abused will end up with same-sex attraction, but that's just what's happened in my situation.
Well, what struck me is, Rian, when I read your story, which was just heartbreaking, there seemed to also be that connection. Would you affirm what Samuel has just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't come from a Christian background at all through my family. we didn't practice, that both my parents are baptised, but coming from a stolen generation and Aboriginal identity, Christians are looked very badly upon because of the stolen generation. So, when it all came about for me I didn't even realise my sexual abuse. I just didn't want to be a victim. So I had that mentality, and I just thought, because I'm 37, back when everything started to happen for me, and I started to realise at that time, oh my goodness, I think I'm gay. No one spoke about it. No one had public affection or anything like that. And so trying to come out at that time was just not common.
So your story's a really interesting one because, you've had lots of relationships with women.
Yes.
Then you've even been married to a Muslim man.
Yes.
Which itself, from your own testimony, was quite abusive.
Yes.
And now you've ended up in a Christian church. I would have thought the world would say that's the last place we thought you would have found a safe place.
Yeah.
What sort of role has the Christian church played, do you think, in your healing?
I just wanted more of God. That's where Islam came into it, because I found that all my relationships with women weren't working. And even when in my early 20s, I dated a lot of men as well, in and out of relationships, one-night stands, you name it. So when I finally came out of my, same-sex engagement, and we were going to be married, and we did say yes to the yes vote, I found an old friend that we started working together, and I just started the conversation about God because I really wanted to know. And I thought, if anyone can help me, it could be God. I really needed to fill that void, because after my mum passed away when I was 25, I felt a dark pit within the center of my being, and it never dissipated. And then when I started to look into Islam, I found it started to go, it started to dissipate, and it started to be fulfilled in a totally different way than all the other relationships that never served me or just abused me mentally, physically, all that kind of stuff. So when I stepped into that, and because the Islam religion is also their culture that's associated with that too, a lot of the aspects of that can actually tie into traditional ways of the Aboriginal culture. So then I started to feel, oh, this is actually, this could actually be where I am. They're accepting of my Aboriginal culture as well as God. So, but then I found, again, that was quite toxic, and I thought, this is not God, Plus they also teach you, in my circumstance and the way that I felt, that you're meant to argue with other Christians about God. And I don't like to argue. I'm like, for me, it's God. Everyone, if they have a religion, they believe in the one true God, So, and then after that ended, I was trying deeply to find God again. And that's when I had a friend at work that was Christian, and we connected on the same-sex attraction side. And he was Christian, and I was like, this is really confusing for me. And he really came together as a friend foremost, rather than looking at my religion as something bad and let's argue about whose God is right. Let's come together as peer support for each other on same-sex attraction. And that made me so happy. And I had a friend that completely understood me on a deeper level. And it just, the way it happened, it's a really funny story through Snapchat. And then just the day of it, we end up at Kingdom City, and Mark spoke to me of hardening of the heart, and I thought, this is the reason why God can come into my life again, is I've hardened my heart against letting him in, truly letting him in and guide me.
So just before I go to James, because I want to drill down on some of this with James in just a moment, I've got to ask you though, what do you think is the difference Jesus has made to you that Islam didn't offer?
He died for me. So, Islam believes that Jesus didn't die for you, and the fact of I actually started research, and yes, I accepted Jesus, but I really went into all my research about it, and I found Nabil Quresh and his journey of coming to Christianity from being Muslim, and his description of Jesus dying for me completely just cemented it for me, because you can't survive that crucifixion. There's just no way in reality that's happened. So, and that became it for me. I wanted someone, because of my Aboriginal identity that I was holding quite tightly. We're stubborn, we're very prideful, that type of thing. We don't, you can't tell me anything. Like it's, we're very proud people. So I needed love, and he was love for me. I needed love and understanding, and that just took over my life and has been an amazing presence in my life.
Fantastic. Now, James, picking up on something Samuel said before, and that is Samuel was talking about having multiple partners, sexual partners each week. I know you yourself have said over your life you've had at least 200 sexual partners. One of the things that I've noticed in your testimony, which actually is picked up in some other people's too, is the passage from Joel 2:25. The years the locusts have eaten, God restores and gives back. How have you, in your experience, seen that to be true?
Well, what happened for me in coming out, and I've got to say this, that I came out, my family was very accepting of that. I was the first guy to come out in my Christian high school, and people just loved me. I mean, literally, the only time I've ever faced people against me is actually from the LGBT community itself. Prior to that and elsewhere, I've never experienced that. People have given me the freedom to live my life.
So you didn't find Christians to be hostile and angry?
On the contrary, what you have to understand is, I still was going to church while I was hanging out with my 200, going through these several hundred male lovers. But even when I entered into my long-term gay relationship, it was there that a guy at university he said to me, do you want more love in your life? And this goes back to restoring the years the locusts have eaten. And I said, hey, mate, who doesn't want more love in their life? And of course, it's true. So when I said yes to Jesus, and I wasn't repenting of homosexuality or anything, I said, if there's anything that stands in the way of your love, Lord, I'm sorry. I want to be loved by you, and I want to be loved forever. I think it's the cry of every human heart. And I said to him, do with that whatever you will. And I didn't feel anything about God, but I made that decision. I learned to walk in faith. In other words, I didn't feel anything. I just walked with the truth. I'd made that decision. And I began just to still my soul like a well-fed child, as I now understand the words in the psalmist to say these things. And my boyfriend noticed there was a difference in me. So there we were, as a gay couple, we started going to church, and he gave his life to Jesus, and we became the archetypal gay Christian couple. At no point did anybody challenge us about sexuality. What they did do is they took very seriously the role of discipling us. And they too were saying to us, look, we're broken. We've all gone astray like sheep and, doing whatever we want, the desires of our hearts. But Jesus has placed upon himself all those shortcomings of all of us. So we learned what it was, just to be open to looking at those shortcomings, really. Now, as I began to do that more and more and more, what happened is I began to feel this deep sense of unrest in this perfect gay Christian relationship I was in. And we really were upheld by many people in the gay community in London where I was living at the time. And I just knew that, I'd learned to already make some crazy decisions, maybe by entering the church in some way. But I made the decision that I needed to really surrender everything to Jesus. I finished my gay relationship. I left the gay community. And I'll be honest with you, in the background, I thought, if my boyfriend really loves me and this doesn't work, I just go back to him. I go back to the community. What have I got to lose? So I made that decision. It was from there, as I increased my prayer life and the stilling of my soul, that things began to rise that put me into regular therapy. I had no desire to change my sexual orientation. I didn't believe I could. I was told it's impossible, so don't go there. So I didn't. But I did say to Jesus, you can have everything. It was from there, in the therapeutic sessions, in the quietness of my own prayer. I also was regularly praying with a wonderful Christian man who had a good understanding of these things. And what happens is the years of my past began to rise. I began to come in touch with deeply repressed pain of sexual abuse, the exposure to pornography, the fact that I'd been raped at 16, 17, and 18, having become alcohol dependent at that point. Also there was the fact that I still was struggling with different fetishes and different kinks. But even before the sexual abuse that started at 8, I realized that the bullying at school, the fact that I had become intertwined through being abandoned as a baby and adopted with my twin sister. I'd been intertwined with her personality. She'd been intertwined with mine. It made sense suddenly that why at the age of 17 I wanted to wear eyeliner and wear foundation, that I believed I was a woman trapped in a man's body. And even in my perfect gay relationship, I was still thinking, well, maybe I'm really a heterosexual woman stuck in this body. And that's why I've got this desire for this lovely, strong guy, etc. I just thank God that I wasn't a teenager today. I would be first in that queue at the gender clinic, and I'd be begging them for cross-sex hormones and to mutilate my very healthy body. I'm pleased to say, having become a dad through heterosexual marriage, that didn't happen to me. But what did happen is all those different traumas and tribulations and all the pain that I'd stuffed down, the Holy Spirit was able to help these to rise, but also to teach me how to be reconciled with my past, to permit the Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, present across all time, his healing touch, the same healing touch we read about in the Gospels, touched my life. So the areas where I got stuck, or there was neglect, or I'd become broken or abused, Jesus came and restored those years. Today, I love being a bloke. I love it. I'm a bloke. There's no way I'm a woman. I love walking with blokes. I love honoring women. I love that. This is who God created me to be. If I hadn't said yes to Jesus and got the therapy and the counsel I got that many of our parliamentarians today are trying to ban and in some cases have banned, I wouldn't be able to become all that God had created me to be.
Okay, so let me ask each of you a question. Sam Albury from the UK wrote a little book called Is God Anti-Gay? And in it, he says the Bible requires us not to repent necessarily of repentance doesn't look from being LGBTIQ to being heterosexual, but to loving God, to being holy. How would you respond to that? Agree? Disagree?
Samuel always has a good response.
I agree because, I say to people, my goal is not heterosexuality, my goal is holiness.
Yes, that's right.
Because so I become heterosexual, then what? I can go sleep around with whoever I want? That's not how it works. Holiness is to strive to be like God. And not just that, is if we're doing anything, whether it be homosexual sex, whether it be heterosexual sex, it's outside God's boundaries, it's going to be harmful to us. So I don't think God is anti-gay. I think it's the boundaries that we put on God. Why should we be limiting God and what he can do?
Okay.
And I think I definitely experienced, that when I was in that wrestle and I was, trying to figure out what was going on. And the more I tried not to be homosexual and tried to be heterosexual, the worse it got. It's not a good strategy. And so that call to be holy is such a much better aim, to be able to strive for, because if you just try and stop what you're doing, well, it's almost like saying don't walk on the green grass.
It's like I'm going to walk on the green grass now.
Yeah.
I would say this, that what I came to understand is my same-sex attraction wasn't wrong. It was just misinterpreted. It was twisted. We as Christians now know that, Satan can't create anything. He just twists what's good, or he layers it with what's good. So I've come to understand, actually, I should find other men attractive. They are damn attractive. God makes some incredible men and some most beautiful women. But none of them and no one is to be an object of my worship other than God himself. So what's happened is, and I know I speak for us as men, and I spent 30-something years walking alongside literally thousands of men and women struggling with same-sex attraction. Deep down, we were all looking for non-sexualized friendship and a sense of the attention of each other, the affirmation of each other, a healthy non-sexual affection that would actually enable us to be able to walk towards God himself. So is God anti-gay? On the contrary, God has a heart for everybody who is same-sex attracted. We've got to remember that word gay is a very new word. Even the word homosexuality only came about in the 1860s. So these are actually even new concepts. Our words we use, and words are very powerful. These words that we use here in the 21st century, we need to almost to get rid of all of those and realize there's as many types of, if you like, homosexuality as there are people who experience homosexuality.
So just on that, James, is that really getting to the heart of it, that your identity is not your sexuality?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, Mark, we ask you this question: how many places and times do you go and say, "Hi, I'm Mark. I'm straight," or whatever word you want to use? And this is what we've come to understand on our journey of, in a sense, inner healing, you might call it, or a place of just finding just greater mental health and inner well-being, is we've come to realize that what was our focus of sexuality, and it really, really was for each one of us to some degree in places, that in itself was a false avenue. That avenue was a limited avenue. That's why, in many cases, it was part of the reason we ended up with mental health issues. It's part of the reason why we began to self-harm, were suicidal. We're in such restrictive boundaries. We weren't able to breathe and to be able to make the choices that we needed to have the freedom to make. And this is why when we love our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community, I mean, we really love them because we know that pathway and that walk. But we're realizing if they're not careful, they're limiting what they've got. Yeah. And we understand that to some extent we might look like the alcoholics that went to AA and came out the other side and got sober. And that's threatening to the alcoholic maybe. And we're not out to threaten our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community. We're saying, hey, we actually do respect the fact you have a choice, but please respect the fact that we have a choice too. And we are concerned for your mental welfare. We are concerned for your emotional life. We're concerned for the quality of the relationships you've got.
That analogy with AA is a very powerful one because the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute has said that any form of gay conversion practice, and they're not just talking about forced coercion, they're talking about prayer. They're talking about reading the Bible.
They're talking about mums and dads having just a discussion at the table with their kids around, I mean, this is like, if an 8 or 9-year-old comes out from school and they are doing today, and I've seen it happen, with the kids around me, is they're coming back and they're asking certain questions about themselves. I remember my own child came out of school at 9 saying, the girls at school are saying they're lesbians. Well, it's because they'd read a book or two from the school library, and this had given them a concept that if they were a girl that liked a girl, which is very healthy at 9 years of age, they must be a lesbian. Well, they type lesbianism into the computer or something when they're on their own. They get all sorts of images and concepts that is going to deeply, deeply affect the way in which their own sexual persona is going to be developed. And this is our grave concern today. So it's not just about prayer and what I'd say they're calling it conversion practices. It means anything that dare to even question or bring about
anything that's not affirming.
This conversation we're having right here. This would be outlawed.
Yeah, that's right. Criminal offence.
Basically, us coming to talk to you to tell us our stories.
Well, I totally agree with you because I used the word before healing, and I thought that's actually part of the law reform's prosecution is to say any sense or any terminology that is associated with brokenness or healing will be outlawed. Ryan, can I just ask you this question? There'll be people listening to this and they're just thinking, yeah, but I'm in the midst, I'm in the bottom of the pit right now. My desires are just like too strong. I might want to change, but there's no hope to change. What would you say to them?
That's an interesting question. Because with my journey, even though I felt in that pit, I had someone that I was working with to talk to. And it was through that connection that I came to Jesus. So, but sometimes you've got to be careful with your story and who you speak to because they might not understand you and they might find it really difficult and overwhelming to talk about some of the things that you've dealt with or that you're going through. People are unfortunately just are naturally judgmental. I find it's in our DNA that people don't sometimes realize that they're doing it, even though they've got the best of intentions. I think that it's, in my own experience, if you really trust someone that you feel you can be open with, just to let the darkness out, absolutely talk to them as much as you can. But, talk to them and say, listen, if this is too overwhelming for you though, please tell me because I just want to talk to someone that I trust and that understands me and that will come from a place of love first and then start to look at possibly counselling and come from the perspective of this is what my mental health is right now. This is what my health is right now and build from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think if I can add to
Yeah, of
that,
course.
is we've all been in that place of deep despair and that real pit. And the thing that absolutely pivotally changed my, that place for me was that I heard a story of someone who had come out, had walked away from the lesbian identity, and that just gave me one word: hope. And that's why we are so keen to share our stories. Samuel has said to me before, we shouldn't have to share our stories. They're deeply personal stories, but we're so keen to share our stories to provide hope for people, no matter what you're struggling with, whether it's same-sex attraction, gender dysphoria, pornography, whatever it is. We're providing hope that through Jesus, change is possible. He has a power of transformation. And so while we know that people are in that horrible pit of despair, you can always look to hope through Jesus.
Now, pornography is a big issue. I know Samuel and James, you particularly picked up on this, but it's not just a male problem.
Not at all.
In fact, our church did a survey and we found that an overwhelming majority of young women also wrestle with them. What do you think are some of the most helpful strategies you found personally in dealing with pornography?
I would say this, that first of all, you've got to admit to yourself, this is a problem.
Right.
And look, as I said earlier, nothing is hidden from God. So, and certainly when I'm dealing with blokes, when I'm dealing with young women today, and you're right, a third of porn consumption today, they say, is from young women. Rather than saying to somebody, oh, are you struggling with porn? I just go for the bullet and say, oh, what categories are you looking at these days? And the reason I do that, Mark, is because what happens is either somebody's not looking at it, and that's fine. But if they are looking at it, it's not just the fact that looking at it is a problem, is that the categories they're even looking at says a lot about what's going on inside of them. When we go and buy certain types of clothing, we want to look a certain way. When we want to eat certain foods, it might say a lot about our own dignity and what we think about nutrition and diet. Well, even in people's pornography addiction and what they look at, God is trying to speak to them to say, hey, you're trying to scratch an itch there, that actually you need to bring that itch to me so that I can scratch it.
So again, James, is it a form of idolatry or false worship?
Absolutely. And of course, I once read that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much. It doesn't show enough, in the sense that what happens is it doesn't show the fact that our sexuality and the sexual aspect of us is something that needs to be linked with spirituality, that it needs to be something that is humbled and placed before the Lord himself. And I hold up an iPhone in my hand here. If I don't submit this to a charger on the wall that I plug it in, it ain't going to fulfill its purpose. The same is true with our lives. We need to be able to come into the light, to stop hiding away with what's going on, to actually permit the shame bubble that people feel around pornography and around issues to do with sexuality, for that shame bubble to have a safe enough environment to be able to be burst.
Okay, so that shame bubble, how important is it to be able to confess, like the Bible says, confess your sins to one another, pray for one another that you may be healed. And I think then it goes on to say the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. Have you found that strategy to be true?
Sorry, Samuel, I'll just want to go.
But Rhian first and then Samuel?
Yeah, no, that's right, yeah. That's what I was going.
They're keen. That's right.
We all want to talk about shame.
But it's just because when I first met James and Samuel in this peer support group, the first meeting I went to, we started talking about porn and masturbation, and I was like, "Whoa, what kind of group did I come to? Oh my goodness, who talks about this stuff openly like this?" It was that type of mentality because it's not spoken about at all, especially for women. So them in their vulnerability and openness and just letting it out, that actually encouraged me a lot. To then, it took a while for me to actually really start coming out and saying, this is what I'm going through this week. This is how many times I've done it. This is why I've done it. Once I started to open that floodgate and stuff, because I knew exactly what they were talking about. I knew that they would understand me. And it was really, really helpful for them to be really upfront and honest with what they're going through. And then that just poured over, and I was able to as well. So it can be, but it chokes your throat, it makes your mouth dry, and then you're like, oh, don't look at you because you're going to judge me. But they didn't. They come up with love and openness, and you got hugs afterwards, and it was beautiful. And it's just like, now you can't shut me up.
Samuel, I think for me, like the whole shame aspect is really important, because I had been shamed in the fact I was watching pornography by someone who cared unintentionally. They were trying to help me, but the way they went about it, actually, I felt great shame, and I actually hid it more, and I just got better at hiding it. And so for me, and the big thing is, I think, as James said, is we have to accept our reality. If you can't, first you accept your reality, but then you've got to be open and honest about it. If you can't have that open and honesty, you go nowhere. And it's like any addiction is if you're not honest with yourself where you are, you're never going to move beyond the struggle. But not just that, it's like any addiction. The watching of the porn itself is actually a symptom. It's like, and one thing I've on my own journey is, like I said, I still struggle with pornography every now and again, but nowhere near as much as I used to. But I'm at a point now where I can go to myself, I feel like watching porn, and I can go, all right, what is it that I feel I'm missing that I think the porn will fulfill? And I can take a step back and I can go, well, do you know what? I haven't had an honest heart-to-heart conversation with someone for a few days. So I haven't had that heart-to-heart connection. I haven't been truly present to someone. So my soul and my heart are longing for that connection. I'm looking for that dopamine rush. But not just that, it's the whole, have I been exercising enough? Am I lying? Because often, like I said, porn is a symptom. Often if it's little things that lead up to the big sin. And I go, have I been getting enough sleep? Have I been eating properly? Have I been honest? Because, you start lying in small things, you start lying in big things. And that all just feeds into itself. So for me, the breaking of the shame bubble has been absolutely important, because I can go, oh, no, this is my reality. This is where I am.
So let me ask you a very sensitive question, right? Reader, beware the question. Because, I mean, Rhian, you raised this, but how important is it to not only stop watching pornography, but to stop masturbating? How important is that connection?
Because I've only been a Christian for 2 years, I'm still dealing with a lot of things.
Sure.
And as things come up, I will self-soothe. I've just been diagnosed with severe arthritis and stuff. So, and with all the emotional stuff that comes up, and because women are emotional people, and because I haven't had a lot of female to female healthy connection and male connection, absolutely, I'll still do it every now and then when I feel definitely triggered. It's hard, and sometimes you've just got to be able to get on your knees and pray.
I would say this is, and again, the massive problem for me years ago, compulsory masturbator. But what happens is, I found I could repent till the cows come home. I could bring it into the light till the cows come home. But what happened is this: as I waited on the Spirit of God and I cried out to God with a real empty heart and a broken heart, which again was his work in me anyway, the Lord began to show me that the masturbation was the fruit of a deeper problem. That I would run to masturbation to self-soothe, to self-medicate. It was a way for me of getting that sort of lifted rush, the dopamine, the adrenaline rush that should be there with an orgasm. And that actually what I needed to be repenting of was the fact that I had anxiety that I wanted to deal with. I wouldn't let Jesus deal with it and enter into the source of that. So of course, for me to bring the anxiety to the Lord, he had to let it rise up within me. And when it rose up, I would try and deal with it rather than saying, oh, you're doing something in me. You're trying to actually restore the years locusts have eaten. I need to bring to you the anxiety that I felt in the early stages of my life of being abandoned, or the anxiety I felt as a young boy in an all-boys school and being bullied and called gay, the anxiety I felt through my abuse, the anxiety I felt by having this porn addiction, the rest of it. So I realized that I needed to wait on the Holy Spirit to show me the actual nub of why I was masturbating. And of course, to masturbate, fantasies linked with masturbation.
Yeah.
And that fantasy is very similar to what Jesus says. It's what Jesus says in the gospel. If you look at anybody else as an object of your gratification or as an object to soothe yourself, they become your God. And that's what he means by sin. And it's just, I don't think Jesus is cracking his whip saying, you nasty person. In fact, he's saying, please don't do that, because it's stopping you from accessing the source of pure love that you were created by and you were created for.
Yeah, that's very powerful, because again, it comes back to worship, doesn't it?
It does, all the time.
And again, AA is one of the things that's so helpful in AA is surrendering. That's the first step to a higher power.
That's right.
Knowing that you need somebody else, someone to get you out of the pit. There's a young guy in my congregation who's wrestled with homosexuality, has found real freedom, and he would describe it as victory, even though it's a continual temptation. But he's asked me to ask you all this, okay? What specific message in the gospel helped each of you to turn the tide with your own same-sex attraction? Leah, can we start with you?
I brought along my Bible.
You can cheat, by the way. You can look at phones.
Look, something that just really stood out to me was in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 to 16. And I'll just read it for you because I don't want to paraphrase. I'll get it wrong. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathise with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet was without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness and courage so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in the time of need. That was just a huge comfort for me, because I didn't disclose any of my feelings with anyone for a very long time. And so, as again, rings true in all our testimonies, is you feel so alone. But then when you find others who have walked very similar journeys and are still in that journey, and you find Jesus himself, he was tempted, yet was without sin, of course. But that is a huge comfort to me. And it means that he can totally understand what we're going through. He gives us hope out of it, of course. Yeah, just that comfort. That
So those times, Leah, when you are tempted, or even today, but particularly in the past, but even today, and you go to Jesus thinking, wow, you know exactly what this is like. We have a Saviour who can relate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's real relevance there. He can totally understand what we're going through and provides the pathway out. Like that was one of my greatest comforts, still is.
Excellent. Samuel, what about you?
I think for me, it's Joel 2:25. I restored to you the years the locusts have eaten, because I think for me, so many of my years I didn't feel complete. I didn't feel broken. I felt so alone. And when I started to look at this, I thought, I've lost so much of my life. Why is it now I'm only discovering this? But I look back and I go, oh my goodness, as I go on this journey, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today had I not gone through what I'd gone through. Yes, it was awful. But God is restoring and everything to me, and he's using all my mess and he's making it my message. He's making it his message.
So can I ask you a personal question? Just sorry to interrupt you. Because there'll be some people that would say that. And I think they'd be really offended. They'd go, what do you mean there was all those wasted years? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
I suppose looking back, did my abuse, did the way I related to people, did that affect the way I lived my life? Absolutely. I know I fell short in many areas of my life. I was a massive procrastinator because I would avoid doing things because I didn't have the confidence within myself to actually feel comfortable doing certain things. So I would avoid them. I'd avoid certain people. I'd avoid certain relationships. That now I'm starting to experience those. I'm going, oh my goodness, I wish I had this sooner, but I have to keep telling myself, no. It would have been nice to have it sooner, but God is giving it to me now, but in an even greater way, and I'm so even more grateful for it because for so long I went without it.
I want to come back to that in just a moment, but I want to hear from our other two panellists, because I want to come back to actually talk to you all about how your life has changed for the better. What sort of fruitfulness are you seeing in your lives? But before we get there, I'm about to call you Rihanna, right? But I know it's not that. Okay, so I'm just going to get that out there. It's not Rihanna.
All right, yes.
Rihanna. What passage what part of the gospel do you think, if there was a passage from the Bible?
I don't remember my passages. I've got a worse memory for that. But what Aboriginal people are all about stories, and that speaks to us a lot more. We can spin a yarn when you get a group of us together. So it's the, when I think it's the Israelites come out for 40 years, and the Lord provides manna, and that speaks to me because it's Him that provides everything for me. If He sustains us like with food and with water, and that was a really teachable moment for me because again, going back to the Aboriginal identity, unfortunately, it's just we're taught to have this. You've got to be well off in life and do well and prove yourself constantly as Aboriginal people to keep up with everybody else, that type of thing. So, we're always about providing for ourselves and providing for our families. So, but when you rely on the Lord, He provides. So that's what speaks to me a lot more.
And just before we get to James, because I know he'll have a lot to say on this, which I'm looking forward to. But in 1 Corinthians 10, it reminds me that the Apostle Paul talks about how the Israelites were provided with manna every day in the wilderness, and that these were lessons and examples for us on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. And then he has this really interesting comment. He talks about then temptation, and that God will always provide us with a way out. So He provides not just for us with food, but also with a way of escape with temptation. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like what He was teaching to the Israelites at that time too, that they wanted to be greedy and hold off the manna and all, and He taught them, no, because I can provide
Trust me
for
each
you.
day. Trust
me, that's right. So absolutely, it's about trust and relying on the Lord to provide that for you.
Okay.
And especially in this healing journey, it comes with a lot of trust. And when you go through this journey, especially from the whole sexual abuse and same-sex attraction and all that type of stuff, you rely a lot. You try to rely heavily a lot on other people, but then it's like your focus comes back to God.
Okay, James. What's helped you?
Mine is John 11:22, and it's a story of Lazarus. Basically, Martha goes out to meet Jesus, and Lazarus has been dead 4 days. And she says to him in John 11:21, she says, Lord, if you had been there, then I believe that my brother would still be alive. And the word she says in verse 22, she says, but even now, I know that whatever you ask, it will be granted. She's almost saying, well, my brother's dead, but it's still in your hands. And there we see in John 11:44, we see Jesus turning around and having asked Lazarus to come out of the tomb in verse 43, he says, you unbind him. And there's a sense in which he's talking to the people around, and the people have bound up this dead body. And there's an extent to which I realized the Lord was showing me my life had been bound up by many things that had happened to me and by many decisions that I'd made as a result of what had happened to me, be it neglect or abuse or whatever. And therefore, it was going to take society to help unbind me. And I need to be careful who I chose in society. I needed to choose people who believed in Jesus and were listening to His voice. But also I needed to recognize that wherever I was absolutely dead, Jesus could still bring life. That gave me hope.
See, that's a fascinating parallel, because in the Tasmanian Reform Institute report, they're saying that any form of gay conversion therapy, not just forced, but anything but verbal affirmation is conversion therapy, right? They're saying that it doesn't work, and if you try, it's harmful. But you're saying, actually, well, we have a God that raises the dead.
Absolutely we do. Absolutely we do. And as I say, I understand where those people who are fighting to ban any form of conversion practice, I understand where they're coming from. Because what it does mean is you literally do have to die to yourself. You have to face the fact that actually there's something somewhere that's been malformed. That's true of all of our lives. It isn't that anybody's trying to have a go at an L or a G or a B or a T or an X or a Y or Z. It's a fact is all of our lives in some way or other, need to be more greatly fine-tuned. We all need to turn around and reject pride. Great Pride Month coming to the end as we record this. And we need to recognize that we too need to humble ourselves. As I said, if my iPhone, if it says you're not sticking a little wire in me and you're not sticking that wire in the wall, it's not going to work. We've come to understand, and this is why our message is so strong to our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community and those who aren't in the community but who are same-sex attracted and gender dysphoric. We're saying to them, hey, guess what? We've got good news. We found the good news. We'd be mad not to go back and tell them. In fact, I'd rather die than not to share this message with them, because if somebody can find even a glimpse of hope like we have, man, they'd understand why we're barking on what we're barking on about. And our politicians need to hear this. And those who are scared, we need to say to them, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
It's such a contrary message to the world, isn't it? You know, how dare you tell me that I should sacrifice, I should, take up my cross, but yet I read in the scriptures in Mark 10, I think, Matthew 10, where Jesus says, if you try to find your life, you'll lose it. And we've all tried to find it, and this is not just our story. So many people have tried to find it in careers or whatever. We've tried to find it, and we realised that it just didn't work for us. So we actually realised to lose our life because of Jesus is actually to find it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And at the heart of it, James, you're saying, and it's interesting that, the LGBT community is, well, it's characterised, isn't it, by Pride Month. But does that actually go to the heart of actually the problem?
Well, what that is part of the problem is that actually, and we're all taught this, we're taught to do it yourself, to manage it yourself. And if you feel that others aren't paying attention to you and aren't being sensitive to you, you try and do it yourself even more. And it is really important to say this, that even where I believe that parliamentarians and politicians are getting it wrong, the church itself isn't getting it fully right. The church has not taken this topic really seriously. It's not learned to listen, first of all, to our stories, listen to what has worked for us, to work out how does Jesus transform each and every life, because his word's very clear that he wants to do that. And therefore, he's got a way to be able to do that. And therefore, this is why I say we don't come with any judgment whatsoever against the LGBT community. But we do have to stand up and say to the LGBT community, please stop judging those of us who, to whatever degree we still experience same-sex attraction, in some cases 100%. But we've got every right to make the choices that we want to be able to make that increase our mental health, that stop us being suicidal, that stop us self-harming, that enable us to be able to have really true, engaging, life-giving relationships with other people. Look, mate, this saves taxpayers money. This stops us having to queue up on Medicare and go to the STI clinic again every few months like we used to have to do. This is the opportunity for us to live a fuller life as we want to. We're not trying to stop other people from doing that. And therefore, we believe the true bigotry, the real intolerance, the exclusivity is not just coming from certain people in the LGBTQ community, but it is now also coming from some of our parliamentarians who are only willing to listen to one side of the argument. We're not going to shut up. We're going to keep speaking. There are literally hundreds of us in Australia in this situation. There are thousands of us across many, many countries in the world that are beginning to experience this. And I'd say this as well, that, even if these laws are passed the laws, this isn't going to stop God being God. And we're seeing more and more people who are leaving the gay community because God is giving them dreams, because God is speaking to them in the car, because God is challenging them. This is God's word. Let's just bow before him and submit ourselves. We don't need more and more and more and more legislation. We need more and more and more humility and faith in Jesus Christ.
Just to add to that, I think what the LGBT community and the parliamentarians don't realise that they themselves are actually indirectly or directly becoming abusers, because they are preventing us and people like us from getting the help we require. So it's not only is it stifling us, it's traumatizing us to a degree and traumatizing others, but traumatizing themselves, because if they do decide that actually this is not what I want, they are now stuck in that situation, and we don't want that for them. We want them to have that freedom to be able to choose where they want to be.
Great. If I could ask you one last question. You're all Christians. You're all believers in Jesus, followers of him. In John 10, Jesus says, the thief, which is the devil, comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. How have you seen that promise of Jesus fulfilled in your own life?
The life I'm living today is a complete opposite, basically, to what it was over 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I never would have thought being married to a man, having children of my own, would make me happy, content, give me joy. I just didn't think it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't for me. But here I am experiencing significant change and freedoms, and I am just so grateful that I'm living the fullest life that I'm able to live today. And I wouldn't have been able to achieve that without the supports that we've all been talking about. Yeah.
Great. Samuel, what about you?
Gosh, where do I start? I think for me, just sitting here in front of this microphone, I never had the confidence to actually be this public about my life and this vulnerable in any area of my life. I still am quite a reserved person to some degree, but I was a very reserved and quiet person. I didn't share deeply. Trusting people was very hard for me. Even I would have one of my sisters, her and I have a great relationship, and she'd come to me with her problems, and I'd want to share, but I never quite felt I couldn't. And I remember once when I finally decided, I was like, no, I came back to Christ and I shared my story. She said, I always thought there was more that you wanted to share. And she said, I'm so glad you feel you can actually share that with me now. So I'm starting to tear up because just being able to have that. And she said, our relationship and the way we speak to each other and the things we share, I never would have shared that with her had I not had the experiences I've had. My relationship with my parents, with most of my other siblings, has improved so much. I have an openness and an honesty with my family that I've just never been able to have. But not just that, I'm seeing that the more open, honest, and vulnerable I am, that's giving my family a space and a place to actually step into and share their own difficulties and struggles.
And Samuel, just on that, do you think the fact that you know now how loved you are in Christ gives you the confidence to be able to share?
Absolutely. It's the whole thing. It's almost like, well, if the world turns against me, Christ will still love me. And ultimately, that's I have to humble myself and say, God, you're enough. If everyone rejects me, you will still love me. And I suppose the other thing, the side of it too, is the way I can connect with people now on at such a deeper level. But not just that, is my world is not sexualized like it used to. I never realized until I started my counseling and really deepening my prayer, I never realized I would constantly have pornographic images running through my mind. And it wasn't until I started to still myself in front of the Lord that I realized how sexualized my mind was and how driven I was by my sexual desires. And people say, oh, but I had the freedom to choose. Like, yes, but it was a constrained freedom in the sense that I was being driven by something. Now, if I choose to go and sleep with a man, I can, but I don't want to because it's not fulfilling. And I see it for what it is now.
Okay. Rian?
Yeah, so I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety massively. And for years I was on medication and I'm not on that anymore. It's
Wow.
It's significantly less than what it was, So I used to have panic attacks and all that kind of stuff in me and hysterics and wouldn't leave the house for weeks at a time, isolate myself from everybody. I had friends and stuff, but never anyone that I was really close with that knew my personal stuff. I was always at a distance. But now these two men know more about me than my own family do.
These two white fellas.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And even, some of my friends have even seen how far I've come and they've gone, how are you so articulate now about how you feel and you're just so open? And I'm like, it's Jesus. It's Jesus, honestly, because I absolutely, like Samuel said, I would not have got up in front of like their situation, or in Kingdom City and thousands of people in churches and Albany and all that kind of stuff, I would not have done that. No way. I would have been like, no, you're right, mate.
James, last but not least.
Last but not least, look, it's just as you said those words from John 10:10a about the thief coming to steal, to kill and destroy, it just made my eyes well up. I'm suddenly aware that I'm sat on this seat, alive, living the best life I've ever lived. Yeah. And behind me is a trail of my friends who are all dead. HIV got some of them, drug abuse got others, just profound depression, clinical depression. Some have been through ECT on the state, and all they've done is just been, they've had all this treatment from the state. The state has not diagnosed them properly and given them the help they need, and they've taken their lives. I'm also noticing that when I was in the L&G community some 25, 30 years ago, that's all there was, L&G. We had to get on with each other because we were a minority. Today, even the LGBTQ community is becoming more and more fragmented. It's becoming divided with each other and against each other. And what's happening is we're hearing of more and more different suicides, particularly in the whole transgender side, which we haven't touched on much today. That's perhaps for another time. And so I'm realizing that the killing, the stealing and the destroying was happening to me, but it's still happening out there as well. And yet here we are being a witness to the fact that Jesus has come to give us life, and he is giving it to us to the full.
The transgender thing, that's another big topic, and a topic for another episode, I think. But you do touch on something which we need to address before we leave this, and that is suicide, because the suicide rates amongst LGBTI people are much higher than the general population, but it's put down to homophobia. Response to that? What would you say in response? Because that's a big tenet in the Tasmanian Law Reform Report, that anything but affirmation will cause people who are LGBTIQ and identifying that way to kill themselves.
I'm going to jump in quickly with that, because what happens is in the lead up to the 1970s, 1980s, there were literally hundreds of thousands of articles in very, very reputable scientific journals that talked about ways to help people who experience same-sex attraction to either accept this, come to terms with this, and in many cases to move beyond some of the underlying comorbidities that existed in their lives. What we're seeing now more than ever is we're seeing more money being pumped into LGBT stuff. We're seeing it at Coles, we're seeing it in Vodafone, we're seeing it in Bond's underwear, we're seeing it in Disney, we're seeing it everywhere. Apparently it's all got to be accepted and celebrated, and yet we are seeing more and more worsening mental health of our young people. And we're seeing more suicides. Why? Because we've stopped providing an opportunity for people to have the opportunity to be able to explore some of the comorbidities that exist in people's lives, some of the underlying issues. Our issues wasn't really same-sex attraction. That was the manifestation of the issues themselves. Deal with the issues. The same-sex attraction is somewhere that either comes into a healthy place or a manageable place, or something that doesn't really exist or run your life at all. That, therefore, deeply lowers the suicidal ideation. So, in answer to your question shortly, if they don't permit people the freedom to address these comorbidities, and the laws they're passing in Australia now are preventing that, of course we're going to see more suicides.
So let me ask you then a very difficult question. It's a very personal one. If you were not sitting in this seat today, if you were not followers of Jesus, do you think you would still be alive?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
Absolutely not.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Why do you say that so definitively?
I mean, I came from a very stable background, so maybe, having stable people around me, I would still be alive, but I certainly wouldn't have the fullness of life that I experienced. But I did have suicidal thoughts, so I don't know where I would be today.
Samuel?
Same for me. When I also experienced gender dysphoria around the age of 14, 15, as well as same-sex attraction and other issues too along with that. And that left me very deeply confused, and I felt suicidal. But not just that. Before I came back to Christ, I hit literal rock bottom, and I was just miserable. And it was encountering Christ that brought me back to life. But not just that, is my own sexual abuse actually permitted me to be sexually assaulted. And it wasn't until I started counselling that
Because you didn't feel worthy of being treated with respect?
because that's what I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I didn't feel worthy of being treated with respect. I was used to not being treated with respect. My sexual abuse set me up for sexual assault. And sexual assault is rife in the LGBT community. I've spoken to many people I know who still practice in that community and who have left that community, and I've relayed my story and they've said, oh, I've been through something similar. They said, but I never would have called it sexual abuse. I just thought it was normal. Sexual assault, it diminishes the human spirit. It's crushing for the human spirit, and it just leaves you empty, shattered, and I'm going to use the word broken.
Rihan?
Yeah, where I was in my journey, if I didn't, I could have still been back in the Muslim community, to be absolutely honest, but still trying to do the same-sex attraction. And probably if I did eventually get into another relationship, because I was already down and out from where I was already, and then if another relationship didn't work, I probably would have, because of, you get to a point where you have enough. You had enough of just trying to do it yourself and trying to get by with just knowing whatever you know. Do you know what I mean? And have no connection with anybody. I didn't have any family in my life at that stage as well. That's another kettle of fish. But it's just being Aboriginal. I can't imagine from the person I was before to the person I am now. It's completely different. I don't know. I think back to how could I have got to that state of being in those relationships, being a strong-headed Aboriginal woman that I am. But the thing is that it's got to break down at some point. I feel that Jesus needs to get you to that lowest point for him to make his power known.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can clearly say that I wouldn't be alive just because it's through the therapy, through the support network, through my spiritual journey that literally years and years of sexual abuse was raised before me. If I had not dealt with that, then I would have continued going through domineering sexual activity. I was ending up in very perverted places. I was surrounded by people who were seriously and heavily into drugs. And as I say, the greater majority of people I knew in the gay community, they were dead within 15, 20 years of my leaving that community. Why should my life have been any different? And yet I know now that I had got layers and layers and layers of trauma. And I thank God for the therapists and for the counsellors who turned around and walked with me. I thank God for the church that walked with me as well and sought to humble itself alongside me and to offer me a message of hope. I take every day as being just a day of new mercies. And I'm just grateful to God for the fact I'm alive. And I keep speaking this out too.
Yeah, it's a fantastic note to end on. It reminds me of the passage in Lamentations where it talks about that because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. Because his mercies are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. Well, thank you so much, Leah, Samuel.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to call you Rihan, and of course, James. It's been great to have you with us.
Great to have
Every
you
blessing to your time with us down here in Tassie. We look forward to maybe the next time you guys come in and we can do maybe a round 2 and we'll talk about.
That's fantastic.
We look forward to that. Thank you, Mark.
Well, this has been another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and look forward to seeing you next time.